The Prince of Persia game influenced a generation. It taught you that going near sharp objects was a surefire way to a quick and painful death. And it taught you that jumping off ledges wasn't always the wisest decision. More importantly, someone needs to have a word with the architect that designed the palace. But beneath the misery, death and falling floor tiles, this game is a true love story. And this love runs much deeper than a simple quest of boy rescues girl. This love can be seen through the developer's passion to create something extraordinary. It can be seen through the millions of players who have experienced the game over the 30 years since it released. And it can be seen through the active community who continue to play and modify the game in order to keep the adventure alive. And then there are those whose sole mission is to save the princess in the fastest possible time. This is their story. This is the speedrun world record progression of the Prince of Persia. Created by Jordan Mechner, the game was based on a vague idea of an Arabian Nights style adventure. 4 years after conception, the result was a game which follows an unnamed protagonist known only as the Kid, whose mission is to venture through a series of levels in order to save an imprisoned princess. Released in 1989, the game has gone on to sell over 2 million copies worldwide and appeared on pretty much every platform under the sun. And whilst the game has gone on to spawn an entire movie and video games franchise, it's the original game that many players still come back to. The game is credited by the Guinness Book of World Records as being the first video game to use motion capture animation. This was achieved using a technique called rotoscoping, where Jordan filmed his brother David performing acrobatic moves in a Reader's Digest parking lot. Each frame was then painstakingly traced over, which enabled the fluid design and movement of the character to be created. The game itself is set in ancient Persia, and whilst the Sultan is away fighting a war in a foreign land, his political advisor Jafar, a wizard, seizes power. His only obstacle to the throne is the Sultan's daughter. Jafar locks her in a tower and orders her to become his wife or she will die within 60 minutes. And that's where the Kid comes in. He and the princess are in love. At the start of the game, a countdown timer begins, giving the player just 60 minutes to escape the dungeons where they are imprisoned, reach the palace tower and defeat Jafar. The moment Jafar is defeated, the countdown timer stops and the princess is saved. The game is over and the player's remaining time is displayed on screen. To accomplish this feat, the player must successfully navigate a number of maze-like levels made up of difficult jumps, obstacles and traps. These levels are also filled with guards of various difficulty, including one guard who appears to have eaten everyone else's lunch. All of these challenges must be overcome before we even begin to consider the Kid's doppelganger, who is conjured out of a magic mirror, and a less than friendly resurrected skeleton. Yet death does not mean game over. The player simply restarts from the beginning of the current level, with the timer continuing to count down towards the princess's death. Oh, but there's a mouse. God bless that mouse. Over the years since the game's release, many players have successfully saved the princess before the 60-minute countdown has expired. However, in order to fully understand the history of speedrunning the game, we must jump to the year 2000. As two Prince of Persia superfans are about to bring speedrunning to the masses. Let me introduce you to Rob and Tammo, two of the greatest players in the game's history. Rob and Tammo were students studying mechanical engineering and computational science in the Netherlands. During the periods they weren't studying, their entire world revolved around playing Prince of Persia. And in 2000, Rob came up with a challenge to see how quickly they could complete the game. And 2 years later, after honing their skills and switching places between levels based on who was best at that particular section, they published a time on their website. Rob and Tammo had set a time with 42 minutes and 24 seconds left on their 60-minute countdown timer. This meant that they had completed the entire game in just 17 minutes and 36 seconds. Sadly for us, there is no video evidence of their speedrun, apart from the screenshot of their final time posted on their website. But anyone that knew them could vouch for their record. In fact, their achievement was so widely recognised it made the national news. It was even referenced to the Ubisoft producers of Prince of Persia Sands of Time game as a benchmark to understand how hard their version of the game was likely to be. Rob and Tammo had brought Prince of Persia speedrunning to the masses. And just like in 2000, when Rob challenged Tammo to speedrun the game, they were about to set a similar challenge to every other player in the world. The message was simple. We want you to try and beat our time. And whilst many others claimed to have broken their record, it wasn't until 5 years later, during 2007, that someone finally produced enough evidence of a faster run. As this time there was a video to prove the accomplishment. Because a speedrunner called SprintGod had just run the game in 14 minutes and 17 seconds. But SprintGod wasn't going to hold the record for long. As under 1 year later, a runner called Master Viking completely smashed this time. This was around 4 minutes quicker than Rob and Tammo's run. But it's here where the Prince of Persia speedrun world record progression throws a curveball, and it's all to do with a nuance in how the game is played. You see, after the completion of level 2, a player can save their game and resume at any point of time. What this means is that a player can use this technique to rerun levels over and over in order to eke out the fastest possible time. And all the world records so far have used this non-continuous segmented run technique. So what about those that saw these speedruns and thought to themselves, how quickly can I complete the game in one go? No saving, no replaying levels to optimise the run, one continuous playthrough. It's time to start talking about a new breed of speedrunners. To talk about continuous speedruns, you first need to refer back to our previously mentioned superfans, Rob and Tammo. Because when they first started running the game, they hadn't actually bothered to read the game's manual. And this meant that for the first year of running the game, they didn't actually know you could save between levels. Therefore, they'd been running times of just under 20 minutes in one continuous go. However, once they discovered they could save, this segmented method was used for all future runs, including their world record. So what is the first video evidence we have of a continuous speedrun under 20 minutes? Well, that would be a video uploaded by htamas during 2006, where he completed the game in a time of 19 minutes and 19 seconds. And this time held firm for a very long time, because everyone else was still focused on setting the fastest time with a non-continuous segmented run. In fact, htamas' time was not challenged for over 8 years. When, in 2014, a runner known as CapN Clever was about to change everything. It was time for continuous Prince of Persia speedrunning to take centre stage. CapN Clever had spent a great deal of time studying the best way to run the game, having watched countless hours of footage from the likes of SprintGod and Master Viking. And in 2014, CapN Clever felt he was ready to attempt to copy these runs in one sitting. And 2 years later, on the 4th of June 2016, CapN Clever set the first official speedrun world record on speedrun.com, a time of 15 minutes and 19 seconds. So let's break down how CapN Clever achieves such a strong time in one single run. The first thing that CapN Clever does is restart the game as soon as it starts. It may not seem like much, but this saves a fraction of a second by skipping the music and animation of the kid hitting the floor. And believe it or not, this is just one of around 150 exploits which have been discovered by the playing community, which CapN Clever plans to utilise. He drops down to the floor below and begins sprinting towards the guard and jumps over him. He carries on running and appears at the end of the level, going up the stairs, skipping the cutscene, and he's on to the second level. Wait, what? For normal players, the whole point of the first level is to locate a sword in order to defeat the first guard. And whilst the community had discovered a technique of luring the guard out of the way to bypass him, CapN Clever chose not to follow either of these routes and simply jumped over him. Well, what CapN Clever had done is execute one of the most important moves in Prince of Persia speedrunning, and there are two versions of this trick available to him. The first is where a player enters into combat with a guard. If the player keeps advancing forward whilst avoiding attacks, the game will switch the guard and the player's position. Once positions are switched, rather than continuing to fight, a speedrunner will press the down key to sheathe their sword and just run away as quickly as possible. The second version of this trick is the one which CapN Clever exploits on the first level. By running at full pace onto the screen with a guard and jumping at exactly the right moment, the player can vault the guard. And on the first level, this is executed by grabbing the right hand ledge as the kid drops down. By then running forward and jumping within 1 frame accuracy at 2 separate intervals, a player is able to vault the guard and complete the level without even needing a sword. But without a sword, does this mean that the player needs to jump over guards for the rest of the game? Well, luckily for players such as CapN Clever, as the game has expected the sword to be picked up on the first level, it automatically becomes available after beginning the second stage. But this doesn't mean though that CapN Clever plans to use it much, as he's more than happy to keep exploiting the guard skip over and over again. Level 3 is the first time the player experiences the skeleton, and it's important to note that this big old bag of bones cannot die. During a normal playthrough, the player is tasked with striking the skeleton over and over in order to push it backwards. Eventually, the player can force the skeleton to step onto a loose slab, which will result in it falling into the pit below. So, that's exactly what CapN Clever does, right? Well, not exactly. Instead, CapN Clever launches himself with a running jump to land exactly where the skeleton's bones are. And by using this technique, CapN Clever has managed to place himself on the right hand side of the skeleton when it resurrects. By doing this, he can quickly scale down the ledge and bypass the skeleton without even fighting it. When beginning level 4, there's a locked room to the right which the player cannot immediately access. No matter what the player does, the gate will remain closed and the guard will simply stand there until the player finds another way to access the room. However, as this is no ordinary playthrough, CapN Clever is about to exploit one of the game's biggest skips. By standing on a specific tile and quickly entering a number of precise inputs at the start of the level, the game calculates the player's position to be within the locked room to the right. So, even though the gate is closed when CapN Clever enters the next screen, the wheels have already been put into motion and the game has triggered the guard to advance forward. The guard steps on the floor plate, which triggers the gate to open, and CapN Clever is on his way. A few specific inputs have enabled half the level to be skipped. The only thing left for CapN Clever to do is jump through the magic mirror, which causes the kid's doppelganger to appear, and he's on to level 5. And just like the gate skip on the previous level, CapN Clever is about to do something very similar. At the start of the level, he climbs up towards the guard and then begins to run away. By luring the guard to follow him, CapN Clever draws his sword and continually presses left to retreat off screen. And a few seconds later, once the next screen loads, he magically appears on the other side of a closed gate. The trick only works through the perfect timing of pressing the left key, so the game does not register a single frame where it considers the player to be standing still. As a result, it's one of the trickiest timings to get right, as any incorrect timing will load the next screen instantly, with the player on the wrong side of the gate, ruining many a speedrun. The best way to describe how to complete the skip is to find a perfect rhythm that allows you to continually retreat, or simply mash the hell out of the left arrow key and get lucky. Level 6 is a much shorter level for CapN Clever to navigate, with the main points of attraction being an encounter with the fat guard and the reappearance of the kid's doppelganger who refuses to open a gate. Instead, CapN Clever must make a running jump to grab a ledge in order to begin level 7. And put it this way, you want to make sure you grab the ledge. Level 7 is the only stage to start the way it does, rather than the player having to ascend a flight of stairs. Speaking of which, when a player climbs the stairs, there's normally a delay in starting the next level when the music plays. So what do speedrunners do to get around this? Well, they simply toggle off the game's sound when finishing a level, which avoids the music being played. And whilst toggling sound on and off is one of the simplest methods to improve his time, CapN Clever is about to start using some new techniques to keep up his pace. The first of these is on level 7, where he clips through a gate by carefully timing a running jump to land just above it. All that's left is to consume a potion, make a leap of faith, and he's on to level 8, where he plans to skip one of the game's most famous scenes. On an ordinary playthrough, it's during this level that a player becomes stuck behind a gate. With no hope of escape, the princess sends her trusted rodent companion to rescue the kid in order to save the day. CapN Clever has other ideas and plans to give our mouse friend a day off. He does this by running so quickly that he's able to get through the gate before it closes. And whilst level 9 is relatively uneventful with only a few huge jumps and guard fights, things are about to start getting strange. The first occurrence of this weirdness is when the kid experiences a broken chomper on level 9 after falling. And this strangeness continues on to level 10, where CapN Clever jumps downwards. Because this time, rather than falling, he miraculously teleports upwards, saving around 8 seconds in the run. Level 11 is more focused on the palace's dodgy architectural decisions rather than the game's unusual physics, but it's on level 12 where things start to go screwy once again. And this can be seen where CapN Clever again makes a running jump and suddenly teleports upwards, saving a large chunk of time. So what on earth is going on to cause all this weirdness? Welcome to the strange world of integer overflow bugs. To explain the integer overflow bug requires some analysis of how the game is programmed. Using this image, 5 of the game's screens have been combined together and labelled A to E. On CapN Clever's run, when he jumps from screen A to screen B, he grabs the ledge on screen B. After the ledge is grabbed, the game should display the kid hanging onto screen C below. However, the game is programmed to not allow subsequent screen changes too quickly, with an inbuilt timer that makes the screen changing function wait for 2 frames. After the 2 frames elapse, the game checks if the player has left the screen again and calls a routine to check the player's position to determine which direction they left the screen. Each in-game screen height is set to 200 pixels, but because the screen changing function was blocked when CapN Clever grabbed the ledge, the game determines his screen pixel position to be 244. And because 244 pixels is greater than the 200 pixel screen height, this is where the problems start to begin. Because when the game calculated the player's pixel position to be 244, it cast an unsigned integer to a signed integer. And as the unsigned integer range is different to a signed integer range, the signed value becomes -12. What this means is that the game interprets the value of -12 to believe that the kid went upwards when he left the screen rather than downwards. And by determining the kid went upwards, the game adds 189 pixels to his position. This means the player is teleported upwards to the lower portion of screen D. Or, for anyone looking for a simpler explanation, By grabbing the ledge on screen B has resulted in the player's position advancing too quickly onto screen C for the game to handle. The player's position is therefore over the threshold of being detected as travelling downwards, and therefore the game places the player on screen D, thinking they must have travelled upwards instead. And by travelling upwards, CapN Clever is now one step closer to the final battle with Jafar. Now it's at this point that the player would normally enter the screen from the right hand side. The kid's doppelganger then drops from the ceiling and draws his sword, with the idea that the player must sheathe their sword and merge with their shadow. As CapN Clever has entered the screen using the integer overflow bug, things are slightly different. Instead, CapN Clever must pick up the doppelganger's sword and exit the screen in order to trigger his appearance. And rather than peacefully merging with his doppelganger, CapN Clever simply stabs him in the back. It's time for the final fight with Jafar. Although, I'm not sure this can really be classed as a fight, because CapN Clever simply makes a tile fall, switches places with Jafar and knocks him from the ledge. The game is over and the in-game timer stops. All that is left for the kids to do is run to the princess and they embrace. An official continuous world record time has been set. The princess is saved in just 15 minutes and 19 seconds. And this world record wasn't about to be beaten by anyone else anytime soon. As 7 months later, CapN Clever shaved another 35 seconds off his original world record. He had set a new in-game time of 14 minutes and 44 seconds. And apart from employing one new skip of running through a guard on level 8, this faster time was achieved through simply improving how CapN Clever ran the game. Old mistakes had been rectified, on-screen positioning had been improved, CapN Clever was stronger than ever. So how long was it going to be until someone was willing to challenge CapN Clever's world record? Or was it going to be the case that CapN Clever was going to break his own record once again? Well, unfortunately for CapN Clever, this was going to be his best ever time. Although that doesn't mean that anyone else was going to get anywhere near his record anytime soon. In fact, no one challenged CapN Clever during the remainder of 2016, or 2017, or 2018. It wasn't until over 3 years later when someone was able to step up to the plate. And this runner was looking to break records across all Prince of Persia games. On the 29th of March 2019, a speedrunner known as Creditor became the world record holder on the Prince of Persia Warrior Within game. And just over 2 weeks later, he also set the world record for the second Prince of Persia game, The Shadow and the Flame. So what does any sane individual do at this point? You of course start running the original Prince of Persia game as well. And by the end of April 2019, Creditor achieved what many thought impossible. He beat CapN Clever's world record by 15 seconds. So how did Creditor go about breaking a record which had been held firm for so many years? Had he found a new skip or trick to eke out those extra seconds? The answer was no. Creditor simply ran the game better than it had ever been run before. By the end of the third level, Creditor was neck and neck with CapN Clever's time, being 1 second ahead, having avoided being hit by a guard. But it was from this point that Creditor began to pull away. By the time level 5 began, Creditor had a 5-second lead by again dealing with guards better than CapN Clever had. And at the end of level 8, Creditor's lead was 12 seconds. The nerves though were getting to him. He lost 4 seconds failing to deal with a guard on level 9 and only had 1 life left at the end of the level. And on level 10 he was again only 1 hit from death. By level 11, Creditor's 12-second lead had been cut to just 7 seconds. However, like any great runner, Creditor was not ready to quit just yet. As by the time Creditor ascended the stairs to the final battle with Jafar, he had done it. He had managed to rebuild his lead over CapN Clever. And when Jafar fell from the ledge, Creditor had achieved another world record. It was the 27th of April 2019. The Prince of Persia world record now stood at 14 minutes and 29 seconds. So does this mean that this is the end of the story and Creditor still holds the world record? As the last person to hold the world record was CapN Clever, and he had held it for 4 whole years. Well, not quite, as it wasn't just Creditor who had had their eyes on the world record. In the background, another runner had been making a name for themselves, and 4 months later, that runner was about to change everything. That runner was Karlgamer. Much like the runners before him, Karlgamer had been studying the best way to run the game. He had seen the tricks and optimizations employed in the fastest non-continuous runs by SprintGod and Master Viking. The problem was, both CapN Clever and Creditor had already exploited these in their own runs. He needed some new inspiration if he ever stood the chance of claiming the world record. Unfortunately for Karlgamer, the information he needed was already public knowledge. It just hadn't been exploited yet. And the source of this information? Well, it was once again from a Prince of Persia superfan. This time, a player known as SuavePrince. SuavePrince was well known to the community. The reason for this is that he was responsible for creating some of the most extreme Prince of Persia mods imaginable. And he didn't just create these mods, step back and watch others struggle to overcome them. Instead, SuavePrince ran these mods himself, with ease. But sometimes you need a break from running challenging versions of a game and simply play the vanilla version. Unfortunately for Karlgamer, SuavePrince decided to record one of these playthroughs back in 2015. And Karlgamer saw something. SuavePrince's playthrough had a number of skips which had never been exploited in any previous world record runs. Karlgamer was about to try something new. He was ready to sit down and take on the world record.
I just nearly drank a moth. You know, there's not supposed to be hard things inside your bottle of water. Alright.
And whether that moth was actually the essence of Persia, Karlgamer was inspired. In the early stages, he perfectly mirrored Creditor's movements, which he'd used to set his own world record. There was literally nothing between the two runners. But it was on level 7 where Karlgamer decided to deploy the first new skip he'd learned from SuavePrince. Now, when a player normally stands on a loose tile, they fall downwards with the tile, often to their death. However, if a player takes a step forward at the exact moment the tile starts to fall, the game still makes the player fall downwards with the tile. And on level 7, Karlgamer takes a step forward as the tile he's standing on begins to fall. As a result, the game starts pushing him downwards, which just happens to be into a solid wall. And because the game is programmed to stop a player entering a solid wall, it places Karlgamer in the next logical position, which just so happens to be on the lowest level of the screen. For the first time in the run, Karlgamer was ahead of Creditor. And by the time Karlgamer defeated his doppelganger on level 12, he was 9 seconds ahead of Creditor's world record pace as he headed into the final fight with Jafar. Glory beckoned. Well, maybe not, because that bloody architect who had designed the palace was about to have one final say, and he brought the roof down on Karlgamer. Karlgamer had just been hit by every runner's worst nightmare: randomness. As he crossed the finish line, Karlgamer had lost his 9-second lead. He had just drawn Creditor's world record, an in-game time of 14 minutes and 29 seconds. But like all good runners, Karlgamer wasn't going to let some falling tiles take away what was rightfully his. Because just 3 days later, on the 23rd of August 2019, he ran the exact same route. And this time he didn't get hit by a falling tile. He had his 9-second lead, and he had his world record, a time of 14 minutes and 20 seconds. But Karlgamer wasn't ready to stop setting records just yet, as 2 months later he shaved another 7 seconds off his time, recording a time of 14 minutes and 13 seconds. And once again he employed a skip straight out of SuavePrince's playbook. By getting into a fight at the end of level 9, with the correct positioning, Karlgamer takes a hit from the guard to push him backwards off screen. By doing this, Karlgamer is pushed straight through a closed gate, which places him at the end of the level, saving around 12 seconds in the run. So with such a large lead over his previous world record, how did Karlgamer only shave 7 seconds from his previous time? Because once again, he was hit by a randomly falling tile at the end of the run. But where Karlgamer had previously taken just 3 days to rerun his route and avoid the falling tiles to make up the lost time, this time he simply couldn't repeat that feat. It wasn't until 2.5 months later that he managed to emulate his world record and avoid the ceiling caving in on him. Karlgamer had extended his world record once again. And it was during this world record run that Karlgamer made an observation.
You know, one of the things I would have to say is interesting about my world record run and the runs that I do that are really good is that typically all of them involve me messing up in some way that is significant enough that I lose time. Meaning that there is a run at some point in which I'm just going to do where I'm going to only mess up a little bit. There's got to be. It's got to happen at some point.
And 9 months later, on the 4th of October 2020, Karlgamer did this.
Well, that wasn't bad at all. The tyrant Jafar lies dead, his power shattered. Throughout the land, the people of Persia hail their princess and the brave youth who saved her from the forces of darkness. No longer a stranger. No longer a stranger, he shall from this day forth be known as Prince of Persia. Now, I wish that was a new PB, but I don't think that I'm even going to get on my scoreboard. That would be cool. Alright, so that's a new world record.
Karlgamer's world record was officially recorded as 14 minutes and 4 seconds. and no one seemed more surprised than Karlgamer himself. And that's exactly where the world record still stands today. But I don't believe this will be the end of the story. We've seen from the players who have come before how far they will go to push the limits of the game. How they are willing to push through the misery, the death, and the falling floor tiles in order to defeat Jafar and rescue the princess. And as Karlgamer stated himself, there is still room for improvement in his own runs. And that's before we even begin to consider the new breed of players who have started to run the game. Those that are looking to challenge Karlgamer and claim the world record for themselves. This adventure is far from over. In fact, it's still very much alive.